Have you ever wondered what would happen if the smartest person in the room wasn't in a lab coat, but pushing a mop down the hallway? This is not just a story about a forgotten engine or a gifted child. This is about how genius, when wrapped in poverty and silence, becomes invisible until it forces the world to listen. And today you're going to hear about one girl who made an engine roar again after a decade of failure, all before her 15th birthday. But to really understand her story, we have to start at 4:30 a.m. Long before anyone believed she belonged in the building. The apartment was quiet, small, and honestly, too tired to care. But inside it, Nia Trenton, 14 years old, was already packing two lunches. One for her, one for her father. That's the thing about growing up with a janitor dad. You learn to move fast, move quiet, and keep your head down. Her morning routine wasn't glamorous. She tied her hair into neat braids, wore secondhand jeans, threw on her father's oversized windbreaker, and double-checked the notebook in her bag, the one filled with physics equations scribbled in blue ink. Her algebra teacher had no idea she was solving problems meant for third-year engineering students. By 5:15 a.m., she and her dad, Malcolm Trenton, were walking 6 blocks through Newark's chilled morning streets, waiting for the number 9 bus that always arrived at 5:23 on the dot. He worked the morning shift at Altair Dynamics, a tech giant, and she tagged along, pushing a cart, cleaning the same labs where geniuses claim to innovate. But this isn't the part that shocked me. It's that no one ever asked what she was doing there. They walked through the side gate, badge barely scanned, janitorial, no questions, no eye contact. Now let me pause here for a second and say something you might not like. We as a society often choose who's allowed to be brilliant. We think genius wears suits, speaks with degrees, and has lab access. But sometimes genius wears cheap sneakers and doesn't talk much because she knows no one is listening anyway. By 6:05 a.m., Nia was in Lab 6, known unofficially as the Tomb. It held the Athena engine, a turbine project that had eaten through $500 million in research grants and produced exactly nothing. For 10 years, the best engineers had tried to bring it to life. 10 years of theories, code, combustion models. Still dead. She was wiping tables. But what she was really doing was reading. Blueprints left carelessly on desks, equations scrawled across whiteboards, graphs, diagnostic logs. And she noticed something, a recurring decimal error in the torque calculation of the intake blades. It wasn't big, just a single place off. But that one shift was enough to destabilize the airflow modeling. That's the thing about machines. They're not poetic. They're precise. Now you may say, okay, maybe she just saw a mistake. But here's what people forget. Identifying a flaw in a billion-dollar machine requires two things: knowledge and courage to believe you're right. Nia had both. At 6:58 a.m., the engineers began trickling in. She kept her head low, cleaning under desks, collecting empty coffee cups, and overhearing conversations like, "Combustion's still unstable at 62% power. Wexler wants a full simulation rerun. We've already done that 3 times. Enter Dr. Callan Wexler, the chief engineer. Sharp suit, louder voice, and the kind of arrogance that's been rewarded too many times. He bumped into Nia's cart, spilling his latte. "Watch it," he snapped. "Do you even know what these documents cost?" She apologized. He sneered. "You should stick to what your dad does. Wipe things." Others laughed. One of them whispered, "Maybe she'll clean the turbine into working." But one person didn't laugh. Dr. Eliza Hart, the only black woman in the department, just watched. Not with pity, with curiosity. That matters. Sometimes change begins with someone simply noticing you exist. Now here's something quantitative for you. In the United States, black women make up only 2.1% of the STEM workforce, and less than 0.5% in aerospace engineering. What are the chances a black girl cleaning the floor would be the one to identify the failure point in a multi-million-dollar project? By probability, nearly zero. But here's the thing about math. Probability tells you what's likely. It never tells you what's possible. After the shift, while her father scrubbed the executive bathrooms upstairs, Nia took a detour to the archives room. That's where she saw Dr. Hart again. And I love this moment because it wasn't dramatic. It was quietly seismic. Nia said, "Excuse me, Doctor Hart, I noticed one of the equations on the Athena printouts had a decimal off, the third line in the blade torque sequence." Dr. Hart raised an eyebrow. "And how would you know that?" "I read a lot," Nia said simply, "and I listened." Hart said nothing, just nodded slowly. But in that nod was the beginning of a crack, not in a machine, but in the wall that separates who is allowed to matter from who isn't. That night, Nia sat cross-legged in her bedroom, poring over a spiral-bound notebook her grandfather had left her. Ezekiel Trenton, a mechanic who fixed everything from motorcycles to race cars. Inside the margins were engine diagrams that looked strangely like Athena. She traced her fingers over his notes and whispered, "Tell me what I'm not seeing." Because here's the thing, her grandfather wasn't just fixing cars. He was designing systems. Systems no one had asked him to build because no one ever asked men like him to imagine something bigger. And yet, somehow he did. So when people say, how could a 14-year-old black girl fix what 100 engineers couldn't? I answer this. She didn't start when she was 14. She started when she was 4, watching her grandfather make the impossible hum. Let's take a moment here. The Athena engine didn't need a miracle. It needed someone who wasn't trying to prove they were smart, just someone trying to make it work. Someone who understood machines the way others understand poetry or prayer. Not from a manual, but from listening. That was Nia's real gift. And as for me, watching her story unfold, I can't help but ask, how many Nias have we overlooked? How many innovations never happened because the person holding the answer was cleaning the floor instead of writing on the whiteboard? And isn't that the real failure? This was just the beginning. In the next chapter, Nia finds something hidden inside the Athena engine. A marking that shouldn't exist, a name that should have been remembered, and a conspiracy 10 years in the making. If you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever been told to stay in your place, then you'll want to hear what happens next. Because Nia's place was never meant to be on the sidelines. And if this chapter moves something in you, drop a comment below. Have you ever seen someone overlooked until it was too late? If someone told you that a forgotten blueprint hidden in a dead man's toolbox could resurrect a billion-dollar project, would you believe it? Let's pick up where we left off. Nia Trenton had just whispered the right question into the wrong place. She'd noticed something everyone else missed. And now, for the first time, someone noticed her. But recognition, that's a currency tightly controlled inside places like Altair Dynamics, especially when it comes wrapped in the skin of a janitor's daughter. The next evening, after school and homework, Nia walked to the edge of a neighborhood that once buzzed with machines and stories. Her late grandfather Ezekiel Trenton's auto shop, now mostly silent. But his journals, they still spoke. She flipped through them like scripture, hunting for answers. Cross-checking notes he made 15 years ago against what she'd seen in Athena's specs. Suddenly, buried in the yellowed pages, she found something. A diagram, clean lines, pressure modulations, turbine sketches that looked exactly like the Athena's intake system. But here's what gave me chills. In the corner, her grandfather had signed it. ET/Altair First Revision. He had worked on this engine. A black mechanic from East Newark had touched the original design. Let that sink in. In corporate engineering, authorship is everything. It's what gets your name on a patent. It's what gets you bonuses. It's what gets you remembered. And it's also what gets stolen. According to U.S. Patent Office statistics, black inventors receive less than 1% of all new patents filed each year. That's not lack of talent. That's a systemic wall. And Ezekiel had clearly hit it head first. Now Nia knew why Athena had never worked. Altair's engineers had spent a decade building on a version of her grandfather's design that had been modified, polished, and compartmentalized until the system could no longer breathe. You ever hear the phrase, too smart to be useful? That's what happens when innovation becomes ego. And what her grandfather built wasn't ego. It was intuition, shaped by a man who understood engines with his hands. Nia had barely slept when her father got home that night. His face sagged with exhaustion, but he smiled when he saw her at the kitchen table, eyes wide, journals spread like battle plans. You working on another one of Grandpa's puzzles? She nodded. Yeah, something like that. But before she could tell him the truth, he coughed. Hard. That same stubborn, chest-racking cough he'd been hiding for weeks. He waved it off. Just warehouse dust. But I've seen this scene before. A hard-working parent who keeps pushing, keeps coughing, keeps disappearing until the lights shut off completely. I've lived that story. So did Nia. The next day back at Altair, Nia cleaned faster than usual, nerves buzzing. She passed by Lab 7B, a place she'd never dared to enter until now. She jiggled the door handle, unlocked. Inside, under surgical lighting, stood Athena. Alone, quiet, almost ashamed. The turban looked different up close. Not just complex, but wounded, like a creature forced into something unnatural. And right there in the metal casing, near the intake coil, she saw something that didn't belong. A small engraving. E.T. Her grandfather had literally signed the engine. She reached out, her fingers hovering just above the metal, when she heard voices outside. Panicking, she slid behind a console just as Dr. Wexler and CEO Dorian Reeve walked in, deep in conversation. The military wants answers, Reeve snapped, and you're still 3 failures deep. I need this engine working by the 15th, or they'll pull the contract. It's the original architecture, Wexler admitted. I think it was flawed from the beginning. Then fix it, or bury it. Just make it disappear. Their footsteps faded, and Nia finally exhaled. You ever have a moment when a room, a place, a smell, just clicks? Like your body knows you were supposed to be there? That's what she felt. She whispered to herself, I can fix you. But here's where things got dangerous. That night, Nia stayed after hours. She knew her father's access code from years of tagging along. She snuck in again. Lab 7B. Lights off. No alarms triggered yet. She studied Athena for hours, comparing every part to her grandfather's journals. The airflow chambers had been reversed. The pressure regulators were adjusted to aerospace norms, but Ezekiel hadn't designed it that way. He built it like a mechanic, not a physicist. It was all about flow, not control, about listening, not commanding. So Nia made her first move. She changed one setting, just one. She realigned the secondary intake valve to her grandfather's spec. Then she left. No fanfare, no witnesses, just a girl with a wrench and a secret. But the next day, whispers started. Fuel pressure stabilized for the first time in months. That doesn't make sense. We didn't change anything. And that's when people began to notice the wrong thing. Not that Athena was healing, but that someone unauthorized had touched it. A quiet investigation began. Security patrols increased. Entry logs were reviewed. And then during cleanup near the break room, Nia heard her name. Wexler's mouth opened, then shut. Because deep down, he knew she was right. But power doesn't like being embarrassed. So Reeve made a move I'll never forget. He leaned forward and said, with absolute calm, You're a minor. Legally, we can bury this. But if you ever come near this company again, we will pursue charges, civil, criminal, everything. And your father will remain unemployed. Let that sink in. They didn't deny stealing her grandfather's work. They didn't deny she fixed their decade-long failure. They just threatened her into silence. I want you to understand how common this tactic is. Every year, thousands of marginalized innovators are paid to disappear quietly. Their contributions swallowed by larger names, louder voices, and better lawyers. That's not theory. That's fact. But Nia wasn't built for silence. She stood up, fists clenched. You want to scare me into forgetting who I am? My grandfather designed that engine. I fixed it. And I don't care how many titles you put on your business cards. None of you were smart enough to see what was in front of you. And with that, she walked out. But she wasn't done. Because that same afternoon, a science fair was being held at her school. An industry panel, including Altair reps, was present to scout scholarship candidates. Nia stood in front of her modest cardboard display, built with borrowed lab parts and salvaged foam board. Her project? Counterintuitive flow systems in high-stress turbine environments. Translation? Athena, but without naming names. And when she presented, the panel leaned in, not because of her graphics, but because she explained the impossible in language that made it feel obvious. A retired aerospace engineer on the panel asked, "Where did you learn all this?" She smiled. "In a garage." She didn't win first place, but she won something else. Respect, attention, access. A week later, a public scandal broke. A former Altair employee, a woman with nothing left to lose, leaked internal emails and footage showing that Ezekiel Trenton had been the original architect of Athena, that Wexler had buried his work, that Nia had restored it. News outlets ran headlines like, "14-year-old janitor's daughter revives military engine after decade of failure." Altair accused of intellectual erasure. Genius can't be mopped away. Altair collapsed under pressure. Wexler resigned in disgrace. CEO Reeve was forced into early retirement. And in a press conference held weeks later, a new interim director took the podium and said, "We owe an apology, not just to the Trenton family, but to every innovator who was told they didn't belong in the room." They renamed the Athena project. It became the Trenton Engine Initiative. Ezekiel's name was added to the patents. And Nia? She was offered a full-ride scholarship to any engineering program she wanted, starting when she finished high school. But let me tell you what mattered most. Her father, Malcolm, was rehired. But this time not as a janitor, as a systems advisor based on years of unofficial observations and technical input that Altair never acknowledged. Until now. And that's how this chapter ends. But really, it's just the beginning. Because this isn't just a story about an engine. It's about who gets to be seen as a builder of the future. It's about how systems arise and how truth fights its way back into the light. My personal takeaway? Genius doesn't always wear a lab coat. Sometimes it wears a hand-me-down hoodie and cleans the floor before school. And if that makes you uncomfortable, good. Maybe that discomfort is what leads to change. If you followed this story from chapter 1 to now, I want to thank you. And I want to ask, have you ever had to fight for recognition? Ever been told you were too young, too poor, too something to matter? Share your story in the comments below. And if Nia inspired you, hit that like button so more people see her journey. Because somewhere out there, another kid is listening. And maybe they're one idea away from changing the world. If only someone would listen back. Thank you for watching. And never forget, brilliance has no dress code.